Hello, everybody. We are the Writer's Block. We are a fantasy sci-fi writers group. My name is Jeffrey. I focus on progression fantasy, both for YA and adults.
My name's Cameron. I write epic fantasy mostly, although I do dabble in some sci-fi weirdness every now and then.
My name's Erica, and I write princess fantasy.
My name's Mari. I write literary fantasy with soft magic systems, and I'm addicted to writing short stories.
I'm Jonah. I write historical fantasy mostly focused around 19th century classical literature.
And I am Mason, and I am currently editing my second sci-fi novel and enjoy writing fantasy when I can. So, yeah.
That's everybody. And since this is our first video, we thought we would talk about things we wish we had known when we were writing our very first book. To hopefully help out people who are writing their first book. Go ahead. What do you all have?
I can go ahead and start out. The thing that I wish I had known during the course of writing my first book was setting expectations that I could live up to. I thought that I would write a first draft and it would be killer and I would make money and just blow the system out of the water, you know? And man, that was just a great setup for me to be rudely and frequently disappointed in myself, in my results, all of it, right? So yeah, I would say just make sure that when you're getting into writing, your first book doesn't have to be a mind-blowing, resounding success, because statistically, it maybe won't be. And if that's what you're shooting for, you may come out of it like a little bit messed up, like I kind of did.
Well, on the other hand, if you shoot to make it the best literary masterpiece you can possibly make, isn't that also a good mindset to have?
That is, yeah. But like, I was like, I'm gonna make bank off of this, you know? Yeah.
And I think going along that point, because when you write your first novel, usually you have so many expectations, things that you hope it turns out to be. And writing is like exercise. That's why I like to think of it. It's a skill you have to keep up. And so you have to practice usually on your first novel. And if I would give any advice, I would recommend that you should prepare to fall in love when writing your first novel, and be prepared for all the hindrances and all of the positive things that come with your first love, which also comes with blindness. Like often it's just such a rush to get what's in your head out on paper, and it's so much fun and it's so exciting. And it's often a representation of what you want to write. And because it can feel so personal, usually when you share it for the first time, people will say, well, like what my sister said to me when I shared my novel with her. She said, I can see a lot of you in here. This is really great, but it doesn't really feel like a book. And it's because I was still learning how to write a book. So I think that's a common thing. Just be prepared to love your manuscript, and it might not be publishable right away if you seek to publish. If you don't seek to publish, then it's just fun. So
I think it's important to, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'm going ahead. All right, so mine sort of dovetails nicely with what both Mason and Mari were saying. When I thought about writing my first novel, what I wish I had known is that I don't have to be so precious with my ideas. I am somebody who struggles to come up with new ideas, and I was really worried that I was gonna blow this great idea that I had because I wasn't good enough yet. But it needs to be a good idea, or else you're not gonna be excited about writing it. And so I needed to, and in fact, I finally did just take the idea that I thought was magnificent, and I wrote a book out of it. It wasn't that awesome, but then the one that came after that was a little bit better, and so on and so forth, sort of like we've been talking about. But I didn't need to be scared that I had ruined that idea. It's still sitting there. If I want to, I can go back to it and spruce it up and make it something worth people's time. And more ideas come down the pike, even if you're somebody like me who was sort of scared of new ideas. It does happen.
Jumping off what Cameron said, I think it's important to remember that a lot of your ideas will be good and they will be reusable, even if they're not usable in the form that you're capable of writing them now. I just turned 24 this week, and on my 24th birthday, I finished writing my 13th book. And so I've been really nostalgic, and I thought back to the first book I ever wrote. I finished it a month before my 16th birthday, so that's 8 years ago, and that book is never going to see the light of day. It was really important to me at the time. I played along with some tropes that I really wanted to mess with, and I'm proud of that. You're always going to be proud of your first novel, no matter what it looks like. You're always going to remember how old you were, even if you were 64, and be glad that you wrote a novel at that age, at that stage of your life. And
You love your children even when they're ugly.
they were half decent.
My
The
child is
children I
very
had in high
ugly.
school.
He says this as a father. As a father.
I'm not talking about my own kids. Kids, I love you. I'm not talking about you.
When
You're
his
lovely.
kids watch this later
Beautiful.
on.
Yeah. I think I'm going to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, my children I had in high school, they're reusable. I use them for pieces now. And, well, their names at least. I give them to other things. Like I wrote a novel recently, and I just stole characters from that very first book that I wrote when I was 15 years old. I stole names of characters and places, and it's never going to be a complete bust. There's always going to be an idea or a person that can come out of that book, and you're going to be glad you wrote it because it's a good resource you can mine later on.
I just really like the idea of Frankensteinian, like taking pieces of your children and building.
I was going to say that analogy really did not quite translate in the end, I think. Yeah.
I
And
don't
that
know,
is
because
Let's
that's
break
kind
this
of what
metaphor.
I did with my first novel, now that I think
Yeah.
about it. Because one of the things, and honestly, I feel like I'm kind of being contrarian here, because Mari's talking about how much you need to fall in love with your stuff, and I'm talking about just getting rid of all of it because it's garbage. But my first novel, I started at my freshman year of high school. And the thing about that novel was I was just completely new to writing. I'd been a voracious reader all through middle school and elementary school. And at the time, one of my biggest obsessions was Emily Rada's children's literature series, Deltora Quest, which is all about magical gemstones. So when I started this book, all I wanted to do was write about these whack magical gemstones that I'd come up with and all the cool stuff they could do. And it did not turn out so well. I tried writing it again my junior year, and it didn't go much better. Even though I had such a cool concept that I was obsessed about, it just didn't translate into something that I could be excited to write a whole book about. And what ended up happening was my freshman year of college, I was reading back through these old manuscripts, wondering where I had gone awry, basically. And I came upon one concept that had come up in the second version, one concept that had nothing to do with magical gemstones and nothing to do with any of the reasons that I had started writing the book. But I got to that concept and I went, that right there is good. And the beautiful thing about that is that it never would have happened without that first manuscript that was all about magical gemstones. But I took the map that I had drawn freshman year of high school about this other planet, and I took two names of two characters and I threw everything else out. And it's not that I wish I had known it earlier, but whenever authors talk about this level of revision, they always talk about, oh, it's okay to throw out scenes, or it's okay to throw out chapters. And I had never once heard any of them say, it's okay to throw out the whole book except for two names and one idea. And that actually ended up being one of the first novels that I ever finished. And it also is still the second longest novel I've ever written, just because I had finally found an idea that I could be excited about, that I could write about, and also I knew what it wasn't, which seems like such a stereotypical thing to say, but because I had managed to get rid of everything else except for this one piece, I knew for sure that that was something that I could grow into a whole novel.
Yeah, and I think something to point out, kind of like what you just said, is like, and I think to point out with our group is all of us have written several books. We have finished short stories. We've been at this for quite a while. And in retrospect, we can look back on our first novel and go like, yeah, that wasn't really good. And then we just continued writing. We continued to believe that we could bring the worlds in our head to reality. And with that practice, with that rehearsal, we could learn like what to take and what to harvest from things in the past.
Yeah.
Jeff, I don't think you've gone yet. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. Good you're talking about this because, like, I think it's great that all of you have moved on from your first book. I
Hey,
have latched onto
I
it.
published my first. I
Like,
published my first.
No,
Everyone here's like, I grew up. I moved past it.
I
I'm
know,
the
right?
idiot that published
Oh
his
my
first.
God, I'm so
You just
cool.
did a great first, Mason.
No, don't get me wrong. So, well, what Mario said is absolutely true. Like, I am so glad that I ended up, after 10 years of something, of working on one book, like moving on and writing some short stories and writing some other books. But mine was going to be, toss that out and then we can talk about everything that's happened, that I loved. Like, my favorite books, kind of when I was sort of in the mix, reading as much as I was really always epic fantasy. We're talking like Robert Jordan, George R.R. Martin, like huge casts, big, huge story. Like, the bigger the book it was, the better to me. Like, I thought books that were under 400 pages, I was like, that's not even a book. Like, that's not even, like, epic fantasy wise anyway. And so, of course, when I started writing my book, which was in college, I was like, well, obviously it needs to have, 7, 8 viewpoint characters. It's going to, span, 6, 7 books, like, obviously, like, of course. And I just want to put out there that if you're a new writer, recognizing that the type of book you want to write, the number of POVs, these things can have an impact on how easy or hard. Not that writing is ever really easy, at least not to me. It can really have an impact on your ability to produce that story. And while you might love a particular style of story, realize that it might be easier to start with something that's a little bit more manageable. Dare I say, one character? No, blasphemy, right? At least
What a novel idea.
surely, right? But seriously, like, starting with, one, maybe 2 characters, and maybe just a trilogy or a duology, like, just make it a little bit smaller. And I had heard this advice of, from Stephen King, you got to write short stories, get into the industry, like, writing and all that. I was writing some short stories. I heard Brandon say, if you're a novelist, write novels. And I was like, oh, yeah, I get to write novels again. And, I'm glad I wrote the short stories I did. I'm glad I got back to novels. But I do wish someone had said, write something that's a little bit more manageable first. It can be in the genre you love. It can be with the types of, scenery and characters that you love, just a little more simple to start.
Yeah.
That would be mine. That would be mine to put out.
I have actually had fewer viewpoints in every single new manuscript I have started.
Yes.
If I continue with this trend, my next book will have 0 viewpoints in it.
Not a one.
That's true. It's true.
I would read that.
My book right now has one viewpoint. One viewpoint.
But Jeff, you brought up an interesting point during your, I don't want to call it a diatribe, that makes it sound bad, but you brought up an interesting point
I don't know
about
what that means.
when you're starting out, don't try to fit yourself into one mold. And I can assume that most new writers hear this at some point, because there's a difference between writing what you want to write and writing to a form. And I don't say this because I want new writers to just step through the door and immediately start writing completely original stuff, although that would be amazing. I say this because more for their growth as a writer than for any sort of professional sense, because when the novel that I talked about earlier, the one that took 3 iterations, it was not historical fantasy. Like, it was second world fantasy. It had historical elements. I'd set it in a very 19th century Europe kind of milieu. But it wasn't until, I think, my 3rd novel that I realized that historical fantasy was what I wanted to write. And it wasn't out of a sense of, oh, the historical fantasy market is booming. If I start writing this, I can clearly get into the market easier. Like, I don't know if it's booming or not, but if it is, that'd be great. But it was more of a sense of me realizing what I can apply my craft to best. And for me, as an English major and a history minor, learning about 19th century Europe and specializing in that kind of literary history, it was the most obvious thing in the world for me to go, oh, I want to write about Thomas Carlyle and Leo Tolstoy and all of these 19th century authors. And it had nothing to do with breaking away from the sense of writing to a form professionally, but it had everything to do with breaking away from my own expectations of what I thought I should be doing for myself, just because of how much fantasy I'd written and read.
I think that's such an important point to realize that you may not end up writing the thing you start by saying, I'm going to be this type of writer. After a book or two, some stories, you might realize, wait, actually, my skill set is more over here, or just the process of writing. I mean, writing a whole book is a wild and, fulfilling, but also insane adventure. And, it takes a lot of time and it teaches you so much. I really believe that writing that first book is one of the best classes in writing you're ever going to take in your life. You're going to learn so much about not just storytelling, but what you want to write, what you get excited to write.
Absolutely.
I know we are looking to keep these, this is our first one. We are looking to keep these, relatively bite-sized, but if there are any last thoughts anyone had about anyone's comments, shout them out. Now's the time for us to all jump in, get a little crazy before we cut this off.
If I may.
No phone calls in the episode.
I am
Mason.
so
Good heavens.
sorry. I'm
He
going to
was
get
just
torn
letting us
apart.
know that he needed to.
We've already got a fan. They're calling in to say enjoyed it. That's obviously what's just happening.
You're already hitting the phones. Thank you so much.
I'm
We
on the
love our
phone right now.
fans.
Everybody, please call Mason right this second.
Right now. My phone number is, no, I'm kidding. Seriously though, the one thing that I did want to say is to the point of, I think what Mari said, and also kind of what some of us have been touching on a little bit throughout this is like, writing really is kind of this muscle, right? I was talking to a friend earlier today who wanted to start writing a book, and he asked me for advice and things like that. And one of the things that I've just become more and more convinced about is that writing is kind of an intellectual and emotional endurance sport, You just hit something and you hit it again and you hit it again and you hit it again, even when it's frustrating, even when it's not working. If you're gonna do it, you gotta keep going and keep coming back to it, right? And that can be exhausting. And so the more that you can stack the odds in your favor when you are starting on your first book, I think the better the chance you have for that book and for writing in general to be a really great experience for you, right? If you have those multiple perspectives, right? If you've got 8 POV characters, and if you're writing 1,000-page books from the get-go, if you're freaking Jeffrey Wolf, the odds are not in your favor, my guy. And I say that with all the love for Jeff in my heart.
They were not in my favor.
Yeah. So like, I mean, it is the first one. Don't expect it to be the last one, and don't necessarily even expect it to be the best one. Stack the odds as best as you can in the favor of having a great experience. And I think if you do that, you will.
Yeah.
And, sorry, go ahead, Mari. Go ahead.
I was literally about to quote you, Cameron. So
Nice.
I think going off of that point, and then I'll pass it to you so you can fix my quote if that's okay. I think to that point, I think it's really important to do what Cameron said earlier. And for your first book, I would recommend selecting your most magnificent idea, like the idea that you're really passionate about, because just like Mason said, writing really is a long-term endurance sport, and you're going to want to pick something that you're passionate about. And I think for your first novel, it's okay to be passionate about an idea, and maybe it doesn't work out the first time around. You come back to it, you visit it, or you have another magnificent idea later. I just think as a 19th century romantic, like the idea of picking a magnificent idea is helpful. Sorry, Cameron, maybe I misquoted you.
That's absolutely right, and it goes hand in hand with what I wanted to say, which is, since it is an endurance sport, you've got to actually love the process of doing it. If you want to keep doing it. So that's why you pick your best ideas, so that it's actually fun to be barfing your brain onto the keyboard over and over and over again, so that's fulfilling to you, regardless of what happens with the manuscript, because that's what'll keep you writing. That's how you get to the second book and the third book and the publishing deal and all that comes on down the road, I hope.
Also, whoever's watching this, please go back after you've watched it through the first time and just like take screen captures of Jonah's faces that he's been making, because there's gold. There's gold in there,
I was hoping
viewer.
no one would notice.
There's gold in there, viewer. We need a subreddit. We need a Facebook page dedicated to that alone. Anyways, sorry, let's keep going.
Jonah Cast
Bell
only.
review.
Yeah.
This is why. But Erica, it looked like maybe you were going to say something just before I say goodbye to everybody.
Oh, no, I was just laughing at Jonah and Mason. We're good to go.
I'm sorry, Jonah.
Fair enough. Well, everybody, thank you for watching this. We really do hope this has given you some thoughts about your first book. Keep an eye on our channel because we're an active writing group. We've been doing this for a while now, a couple of years. We want to start sharing what we've found about the writing process as we all look to get published because we're all, on that path. Close. You're soon. So go off and write. We'll see you next time. We're the Writers.